Okay. Our last section of Theme 1 Rituals, I want to talk about some issues around gender and society. Um, women, let's talk about gender first. Women participate in all the pillars of Islam, though there are notable differences regarding, prayer, salat. In general, this is an important statement. In general, men and women usually experience some sort of separation in the mosque. But this varies widely according to regional variations in different Islamic legal views. It varies widely geographically and in time. Um, when we went to several years ago, I took my class to the Hoover Crescent Islamic Center, and we observed a prayer service. And the men, uh, so they faced the mihrab, but that's the niche that shows you the Qibla, the direction toward Mecca. So the men face it, and they're kind of in front of it, and then the women are sort of behind the men in an alcove that still sees the mihrab, and so the men and women can't see each other, uh, so that they're separated. Um, and then Ismaili Muslims, typically, we have a number of those in our school. They're probably the most liberal uh, part of Islam, and their men and women are also separate, but they're simply on different sides of the room. Imagine an imaginary line dividing the room into two rectangles. They just simply are side by side. The important thing is, if you don't want women uh, in front of men because of what you're doing, it's for modesty. It's not necessarily patriarchal, although in some cases it could be. Many mosques today will put women behind a barrier, a partition, or in another room. Mosques in South and Southeast Asia put men and women in separate rooms as the divisions were built into them centuries ago. In nearly two-thirds of American mosques, women pray behind participations or in separate areas, not in the main prayer hall. Some mosques do not admit women at all due to a lack of space and the fact that some prayers, for example, the Friday service, are mandatory for men but optional for women. More about that in a minute. Um, Although there are sections exclusively for women and children, the Grand Mosque in Mecca is desegregated, as is the Hajj itself. Um, I assume they still stay on separate sides of the building to maintain that modesty. The issue seems to have been fluid over time as well. As with all things Muslim, it is useful to examine the example of the Prophet, WWMD. Some schools of thought claim that Muhammad preferred women just pray at home rather than at the mosque. Muhammad is also recorded to have said the best places for prayer for women are the innermost apartments of their houses. Now, some schools of thought interpret these hadith as signs that women should be encouraged to pray at home rather than in the mosque. However, other schools prefer to look at the context of the sayings, which suggests they were given at a time when women were in danger when leaving their homes, and consider mosques as welcome for women as their homes. It's just getting there was unsafe. Remember, we're talking about medieval Arabia. Now, pre-Islamic Arabia was a very, very dangerous place, and the coming of Islam changed that enormously. But it didn't change it completely overnight. And women were in some cases in danger. That's why they stayed home. Muhammad, in fact, did not forbid women from entering his mosque in Medina. In fact, he told Muslims, quote, not to prevent their women from going to the mosque when they ask. Um, However, segregation of sexes in mosques and prayer spaces is reported in one of the most authentic hadith books in Islam. It says that the best rows for men are the first rows and the worst ones, the last ones, and the best rows for women are the last ones and the worst ones for them are the first ones. That is, so by traditional rules, women are most often told to occupy the rows behind the men. But again, this is a practical matter, as the traditional posture, kneeling on the floor, head to the ground, made mixed gender prayer uncomfortably revealing for many women and distracting for some men. Distraction is a big deal. When we went to the Hoover Crescent Islamic Center, Mr. Tawfiq, who was then the president of the Birmingham Islamic Society, he pointed out that the carpet And of course, the room is carpeted for prostration, for comfort. We were in there, with our shoes off. He pointed out the carpeting was very plain. This is a tradition because very elaborate design would be distracting, and your attention should be on God. So, something like a woman could be distracting to a man, but also anything could be. So distraction is to be avoided. Why the key is not working. It is also recorded that Muhammad ordered that mosques have separate doors for women and men so that men and women would not be obliged to go and come through the same door. That, again, I think is about distraction more than about any sort of patriarchy. He also commanded that after the evening prayer, women be allowed to leave the mosque first so they would not have to mix with the men. Same thing. But it has not been reported that there was any barrier between men and women in the Prophet's mosque. That's important. Now, I'm assuming they were separated by an invisible barrier on either side, like the Ismaili example I explained earlier. After Muhammad's death, many of his followers began to forbid women under their control from going to the mosque, although there's some evidence that this was, again, for their protection. The second caliph, Omar, for example, also prohibited women from attending mosque, especially at night, because he feared them to be sexually harassed or assaulted by men, and he asked them to pray at home. As Islam spread, it became unusual for women to worship in mosques because of male fear of immorality between the sexes. Sometimes a special part of the mosque was railed off for women. For example, the governor of Mecca in 870 had ropes tied between the columns to make a separate place for women, but no more significant barrier than that. Let's look at some societal issues. First of all, communal. A lot of this is communal experience. The communal aspect of the experience, people doing it together, is important. Ritual actions during Hajj are rarely performed alone, and to be surrounded by brothers and sisters in faith dressed in ihram, that same simple clothing, of all ethnic backgrounds, stages of life, social standing, enhances the sense of humility and of unity, of belonging to the great Ummah. The reenactment of actions and rituals carried out by prophets such as Ibrahim, the sacrifice of Ismail, commemorated on Eid al-Adha, and Muhammad, who himself did tawaf, circumambulation around the Kaaba. That brings faith and sacred history alive and provide a sense of communal shared history and shared identity. Looking at individual experience, think about the person just within their own head, it's enhanced. The experience is enhanced not only by years of expectation to fulfill this duty, but also by required preparations before starting the Hajj. There are practical ones like provision for the family back home, travel arrangements, and ritual ones, ihram, cutting of hair and nails, getting your mind and intention set properly to focus on God. The Haji focuses his or her mind on spirituality by performing actions dedicated to Allah. Maybe recitation of divine names and prayer, constant feature of the pilgrimage. So Allah has 99 names, and Muslims have prayer beads, much like Catholics have the rosary, that remind them to count off the names. According to prophetic hadith, when piously performed, Hajj is the most meritorious jihad, the most struggle, most effort, and it is an effort. It's a huge effort, physically as well as financially. When at Mina, the Hajj ritual throwing of pebbles, stoning the devil, that's a powerful symbolic action of the individual's struggle against evil temptations, both external and internal, in terms of greed, selfishness, etc. A pilgrimage is an inner and outer journey, and the rituals of the Hajj have both inner and outer aspects. To pray at Arafat, the central ritual of the Hajj, is also an intense experience, as it is symbolic of the Day of Judgment and an opportunity to revisit one's life bare in front of Allah. To visit the house of Allah, which is the Kaaba, which Muhammad dedicated to the worship of Allah alone, and which is central to the performance of prayer of every Muslim in the world, because they're praying toward it, is the summation of physical and spiritual experience of the individual Muslim, the most palpable expression of identity and unity of the Ummah. Now, Some of these slides have these bright red words, important information. I mean by that this is stuff that I have seen on paper 2 questions. So please pay particular attention, to that. And that concludes theme 1.